Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Let me know if you can hear me. Let me know if the sound is coming through. I think it should be. Recently, we haven't had any kind of technical problems. And also, I see that there are a few viewers. And if so, then if you have any questions, please type them in the chat. Hello, Mary. How are you? Hello, Eki. Nice to see you. Good, you can hear me. So again, before we start, then it would be good just to remind ourselves exactly why we are engaging in this discussion. And of course, the reasons that you have are your reasons. Those are personal. You have to kind of remind yourself of that. You know, for me, then I think this discourse is important. That we can share ideas with each other. And really, when you ask questions, what you're doing is you're sharing your way of thinking, right? It's not that you need me to inform you about something. We kind of need to think about these issues that arise to mind, because we have lots of doubts. There's lots of things that we're not sure about, especially when it comes to the spiritual path. Actually, when I say that, that's kind of mistaken. It's not just about the spiritual path. It's about the mundane world as well. Often we can wonder exactly why we engage in the things we engage in, you know, our sort of materialistic ends and the importance of pursuing them. We can have doubts about these things. And so by sharing our doubts, sharing our insights, our thoughts, and everyone can benefit from that. And then what I can do is I can sort of present it from the perspective of the Buddha Dharma, but especially the Tibetan Buddha Dharma, because that's what I've studied. But that's not the only valid source of information. If you wanted to sort of ask questions about Western philosophy, then you might be better off asking Jeanette, perhaps. And if you wanted, if you had questions about human health and natural energies, maybe you would ask Eki. We all have our own sort of skills and background. I understand that Mary's a scientist. I'm not sure if it's earth science or something like that. But so we can sort of all share our abilities, share our knowledge, and help each other to gain some kind of sense out of this life that we've possessed. You know, to start off with, it's difficult even to know why we are here. What brought us here? Is there any purpose? Or is it, as many suggest, just the consequence of kind of a series of random events? I mean, not so long ago, then many scientists believed that the universe was deterministic. And by that I don't mean it was determined in advance by God or some supreme being, but that you could calculate everything to such incredible accuracy that you could basically know what the future would hold. That was kind of the thought behind Newtonian physics. That if we could just refine our kind of accuracy, then ultimately we could sort of predict what was the outcome would be, how things would change. But now we understand that there's something called uncertainty, quantum uncertainty, and that means that things aren't fixed. And not only that, what we've come to realize in more recent times is that very, very small perturbations in the cosmic kind of ether or fabric of the universe can have huge differences in final outcomes. And this is in accordance with what is taught in the Buddha Dharma. And this is also a mechanism by which interdependence and karma cause and effect can work. Because these small influences can have a great effect. For example, what on earth brought our little group together? We've got like 10 or 15 people here, and we're meeting online from all different corners of the world. Some people are in Iceland, some people are in Europe, in Scotland, etc., Germany. And for some reason, we've met each other. And we're not really going to convince ourselves that it's like the holy YouTube algorithm has brought us together, that sort of thing. You know, what happened before that? We all had to be born in different parts of the world. We all have to share similar interests. the algorithm works, but it works based on our kind of preferences, right? If you're interested in auto mechanics and racing cars, then you wouldn't sort of encounter my videos online. You might encounter my videos online. Oh, hello from Tampa. You're from Tampa. How nice. My aunt lives in Florida. You know, if I post things about cutting trees down and stuff. It's a bit of fun, but it also gives you some insight into what's going on at the retreat, the kind of effort we have to put into it in order to make this place a practice. And it sort of gives you an idea of what I'm like as a person as well, outside of the context of being a monk or a Buddhist teacher. So we all have these preferences, likes and dislikes. We have this history, and our history is now recorded into the kind of cloud or whatever. And so the YouTube algorithm is working kind of, you know, mathematically, but it's based on what we're interested in. So because of our mutual kind of intention and interest, then we've been brought together. And that's kind of wondrous. It's almost unimaginable, right? It's even unimaginable to think how in this vast universe there is sentient life, you know, self-aware beings that are able to question the world around them and question the meaning of life, whether or not there is purpose. So I can't give you a definitive answer to any of these questions. I can only relate to my experience through my own practice in meditation. And also I can sort of recount or parrot what I've studied or heard of the Buddha Dharma, you know, over the many, many sort of thousands of hours of study I've done. I kind of have been lucky, or I've had good karma, and so I've been in an environment where I could continually study ancient scriptures, not only from the Buddhist tradition, but we also study the tenet or philosophical position of other kind of Asian religions like Hinduism, various different forms of Vedic religion, and Jainism, that sort of thing, also nihilism. So it's a bit like the study of philosophy that you do in university, but I mean, we do it 4 or 6 hours a day for, you know, 12 years. I mean, that's tens of thousands of hours. So I'm very fortunate. And that means I can kind of try to remember some of the things I've been taught. I'm getting a bit old now, so I kind of forget things or mix things up. But I do my best to answer your questions from 2 perspectives. One is from the scriptures that I've studied, and one is from my own personal experience in meditation. And this is what we call the 2 paths of, or the 2 kind of transmissions of the Buddha Dharma. There's the transmission of the realization and the transmission of the scriptures. And the realization is that which resides in the minds of practitioners. I mean, really, it's about noble beings. I'm not a noble being, but our own experience is valid. Each one of you has valid experience. And I benefit from that. You know, when you send comments online, then it helps me to understand my own position better. And like I say, then from my own practice, I've been fortunate enough to meet an authentic teacher who is part of an authentic lineage. And that's very rare these days. Although we think it's not rare, it's very rare. Especially when it comes to understanding this insight meditation. There's very few people who teach it. And it doesn't really happen in the West. So I've kind of had some benefit from that, and I can refer to that as well. And I have something in my own practice that is what you call a reference point, that kind of clarifies the meaning of what's in the scriptures. And that's really important. You need these 2 things. And that's why it's important for us to study the ancient texts, because it's the only avenue that we have to connect with the realization of the past masters, because they're no longer living, right? They're not there for us to question. And so we have to look at the histories, their life stories, and then what's taught in the texts about what is meditation, what is mind, you know, what is this thing called luminosity, etc. And so we have to kind of infer the eventual meaning. But the best thing is to have a teacher who has their own experience, and then everything they say is related to that. So I try to relate whatever I say, however I answer your questions, to my own personal experience. Not that that's something significant or profound in any way, but it's the best I can do. So hello everyone. Let's see if anybody has a question. Hello Brother Lama, how was your day? Well, it's only really just begun, but it's okay. I was at the retreat yesterday, so I got back late yesterday. It's been a bit of a rush catching up. I had to wash my parents' bedding and stuff like that. But so far, so good. Jason. Hello, Jason. Like the name. I used to live in a place called Cornwall, and your name is Cornish. It's funny because I first saw your name online after I posted something about Cornwall, and I wondered whether or not the algorithm had connected you to my video because I mentioned Cornwall and your name is Cornish. It's that sort of thing. I saw your video about the Bardo. How would you reconcile Bardo experiences with near-death experiences, research and experiences? Near-death experiences tend to have God, love, judgment. Thanks. Yeah, so Jason, I did a video on near-death experiences, quite a short one, but I covered many of the points there. And so I encourage you to have a look at that. But in general, then, there's many things about the Bardo that are confirmed by personal experience for those people who have had near-death experiences. And we're kind of fortunate in the modern day because of the advances in medical science that many more people come back from the brink of death. And it's generally held by scientists and also by most sort of modern people in the modern world that consciousness is just a function of the brain. So it's just a kind of consequence of action on a physical entity called the brain. And so the idea is once you're flatline, that's it, there's nothing. But what we see from these people who return from near-death experiences is that during this period, and sometimes it's prolonged period of flatline, where the brain is not operating, that they have experiences. And not only that, that they can recount or remember what happened in the room while they were flatline. So this directly contradicts the idea that there is no consciousness other than the function of the brain. So this is one very important point. And actually you can't refute this. As I've understood, and if you watch these videos called Closer to Truth, it has been covered in one of those. I did post on the community post the link for this particular video. And it was somebody discussing the scientific position on this near-death experiences. And what scientists tend to do is they explain this period when the patient is flatlined and they appear to have memories. And they see that as a function of various parts of the brain shutting down. And then it causes this kind of false memory of a time when they were actually unconscious and had no kind of mental activity. But the point that this kind of eminent physicist and theologian had made was that the scientific explanation didn't explain the process. All it did was explain some small parts of this process of going to a near-death experience and being flatlined. And how he explained it, and it's something I've read in another book that I've been looking at recently, very much agrees with that, in that scientists tend to, what they do, it's like all of us do this, we try to explain things in a way that fits with our already held beliefs. And this is a big problem in the spiritual path as well, because we tend to approach spirituality from this position of my current view. So we hold strong beliefs, and then we're looking for something that agrees with that. And that's seen to be kind of mistaken in the Buddha Dharma, because this word Dharma, or in Tibetan it's Chu, it means to change, or to fix, basically. The word means to fix. So that's the kind of meaning interpretation of it. It's not really the etymological meaning of the word, but so it means to fix or repair our way of thinking. So if we're already fine the way we are, we don't need a spiritual path, right? We already have the correct view. That's what we kind of do. We look for something that's in harmony with the way we naturally think, and that doesn't challenge us, and that's kind of mistaken. But scientists do it as well. So they have these beliefs that, well, all this spiritual stuff is mumbo jumbo. I'm a scientist, I don't believe in that. And so then they look for things that will disprove this phenomena. And so this kind of eminent kind of physicist, then his position was, he looked at it very closely, is that they were just picking, they were kind of just cherry picking a few things that might explain a very small percentage of this phenomena in order to basically shelve it and put it aside, to refute it. And so we can't basically, and he would know, I wouldn't, he's a scientist, right, quite an eminent scientist, that we cannot explain away this phenomena through science, through our current understanding of the way the brain and the mind work. And if you look at some of this research into consciousness, then many of the people who are interested in this are anesthesiologists. And that's because they understand that there's a paradox there, and that there's this problem of understanding even what unconsciousness is. And so it seems to be that the ultimate meaning of this, of consciousness, etc., is more complicated than we like to present it, and that it's only related to brain function, and that these people, for example, anesthesiologists, then they're aware of this conflict, and so they're looking for a kind of better model to explain it, and they're the ones involved in some of this research on consciousness, including Sir Roger Penrose's research on consciousness that he's doing with an anesthesiologist. So anyway, I'm wandering off topic. Now, the video I made about the bardo was made or inspired by a friend of mine. In fact, he's somebody who happens to be a neighbor at this land that I bought for a meditation retreat. So it's not somebody I knew, I just sort of kind of met him. And I met him because he had a stroke recently, and he also had a near-death experience. So he had a stroke and a seizure and a near-death experience. And the thing is, when he had this experience, it was the experiences that were explained in the book on the bardo. So these kind of being crushed, etc., under great weight, and these kind of tormenting spirits and things like that. And it really opened his eyes, because to him it matched so closely to what was being taught in this Bardo Todro, which is this sort of liberation. It means liberation through hearing. And it's a book that many people are familiar with. The title is the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and it's been popularized. But many people misunderstand the context of this text itself. So the Bardo Todro, it means to liberate through hearing, right? What it is, it's a text that you read out to somebody as they're going through the process of dying. And the purpose is to encourage them to recognize the clear light in this state. And basically it's like, well, you should know now that you're dying. There's no way for you to come back. You're going to pass into the next life. And then it reminds them at this time, then this Buddha family will arise. And when these images arise, we see them as terrifying. But somebody who has meditation recognizes that this is just an emanation of the clear light. And if there is that recognition, then there is liberation in the bardo. So that's why it's called the Bardo Todro. So it's liberation through hearing in the bardo. So anyway, his own personal experience matched closely on these bardo experiences that were taught in this text. Now, many people who have near-death experiences experience things like angels, etc. Now, a lot of this has to do with our cultural context. So in the West, where we're 70-80% Christian, and we're brought up with Christian iconography and imagery, and then we interpret our experiences in a way that kind of matches our culture. And so my friend had some exposure previously to Tibetan Buddhism, and I think this may be part of the reason why he associated it with the Tibetan Dharma. But the one thing that is common, and although I know in the West this is often associated with Christianity, but you have to understand that in the East that's not the case, right? Because they haven't got this Christian kind of cultural context. That the one thing that is very common with everyone who goes through this process is when they come back, they have this strong conviction and feeling about a spiritual importance to life, a meaning or a purpose in life that they often didn't have before they had the near-death experience. And this, to me, is the most important thing, is this feeling or belief that there is more than this mundane materialistic world that we believe in, that we're so convinced by. You know, we dedicate all our energy and lives towards the acquisition of wealth, well-being, you know, material goods, and especially in the West. And so often what happens is people who go into, you know, temporarily visit the afterlife, let's say, or the bardo, is that when they come back, they have purpose in their lives. And one of the most common purposes is that they want to share the wisdom that they've been exposed to, that there is this sort of supreme or, you know, otherworldly kind of nature to reality that is the actual meaning or the purpose of our existence. And it's love, basically. It's love and compassion. It's what we call bodhicitta in the Buddha Dharma. And in Christianity, it's the same. It's this Christian love, that looks on all beings with care and concern. And so this happened to my friend. And to this day, although, he's never been educated in philosophy or the Buddha Dharma, that he has this strong feeling that he must use this opportunity and share it with others to help them make spiritual progress. And it's wonderful, it transforms people. So other than that, then, as I said, you could watch my short video, but also online, then there's a hell of a lot of information about near-death experiences. What I noticed was when I typed in near-death experience into the search panel, then most of it was about angels and Christian iconography and stuff like that. But that's very much because of our cultural context. I think I suggest that you look into some of the research. And of course, there's a lot of kind of parapsychology and kind of bit odd and not very good science there, but there's also a lot of research into the actual facts about this phenomena. And I think it was very kind of eye-opening. And also I noticed on YouTube there's lots of videos, but again, a lot, 70% of them are about seeing angels and things like that. So my friend experienced what you could call angels. I think somebody who was from a Christian background would have called them angels, but to him they were more like kind of spirits, female spirits, maybe like land spirits or First Nation kind of indigenous spirits. And we also have this in the Buddha Dharma, especially in the Tibetan Buddha Dharma, because this shamanism is very sort of prevalent in Tibet. And so these are called kandros, or they're sky goers. And so they can be female emanations of enlightened mind, or we could call them spirits perhaps protector deities, that sort of thing. Okay, so tend to have God, love, and judgment. Yeah, the thing about God is our expression of what the ultimate could be, and that manifests in different ways for different societies and different cultures, right? So many people say this Dharmakaya we talk about in the Buddha Dharma is nothing other than God. It's just a more kind of, let's say, sophisticated presentation of what that ultimate could be. But it's not really so different than what is presented in Christianity. When you look at the theology itself, when you start looking at it, it's not just about some bearded guy up in the clouds. That's the way it's presented to the congregation, who in the Middle Ages, etc., were totally uneducated, right? They didn't even know the language. It was all in Latin originally, and they didn't even know what was being said. They just had these pretty pictures and stained glass, and they just imagined some big guy up in the sky, right? Kind of patriarchal kind of heaven. But if you look at this presentation of the Trinity, then the aspect of God is very much like the Dharmakaya in Tibetan Buddhism, or in Buddhism in general, and that's because, well, actually Mahayana Buddhism, sorry, I'll correct myself, the Hinayana doesn't believe in the sort of Dharmakaya in the same way as we talk about in the Mahayana. But this ultimate God is something that's beyond conception, that we can't have a direct connection with. And so in order for the God to act in the material world, there's this intermediary, which is the Holy Ghost, right? And then there's this manifestation of a sort of God in human form that is Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ becomes our sort of first minister, I suppose. You have to excuse me, I'm not very knowledgeable about Christianity. But I have heard some kind of theologians talk about this Holy Trinity in this way. So you've got this ultimate one that is God. And remember, like Moses had to communicate with God through a burning bush, right? And so there was this intermediary, because God is this kind of mystical and absolute thing. And in all kind of philosophical tenets, then they say that, this sort of limited conceptual mind cannot interact with the ultimate. So God's somehow ultimate and needs an agent. And the agent for God acting within our world is like the Holy Ghost, who can kind of inspire people. And then there's actually a physical incarnation that is the Jesus Christ. And in the Buddha Dharma, it's similar. We have called the Nirmanakaya. The Nirmanakaya is the manifestation, the body of manifestation. And that would be what we would call Jesus Christ. That is the Buddha who came to the earth in a physical form. And then we have the Sambhogakaya. And the Sambhogakaya is it's sort of the enjoyment body. But this is what appears to the minds of enlightened beings. It's generally, represented as these kind of deities with all kinds of jewelry and stuff on. But really it's kind of this spirit, in a way. You would call it a spirit. So it's this enjoyment body, which is only, ordinary beings don't interact with this. We see pictures and tankas and we do sort of pujas, but we don't directly meet this Sambhogakaya. And then there's the Dharmakaya. And the Dharmakaya is the actual ultimate truth, the realization that abides in the mind of the Buddha. So really, there's not a huge difference between that position. There's only a difference when we kind of interpret, God as this gray-haired guy with a beard up in the clouds, and Jesus as an ordinary being, and we see it kind of in that way. But, it's not too different. And as I've said many times before, for these kind of Buddhists from the mountains in Nepal and India, etc., in Tibet, then their Buddhism, their religion, is very much a theistic religion, really. The way they think about it is basically like Buddha as a god, but especially in Tibet, it's not even just about Buddha, it's about all these deities, right? We've got Tora and Dorji Palmo and Dorji Chang, and we've got all these kind of deities with all the sort of mini arms and all kinds of jewelry, and they're all different colors and stuff like that. So for them, they worship God. They don't know anything about the Buddhist final position. What you have to understand is the final position of Buddhism is actually quite refined. It's quite kind of sublime and beautiful, really. And also it doesn't have any problems when encountering quantum physics and things like that. So, can you name one of the most difficult and one of the most beautiful experiences during your retreat in Nepal? Beautiful and difficult. Yeah, I mean, in general, let's say we see difficult things to be bad. So I'm not sure exactly what context you mean difficult. But really, especially in Tibetan Buddhism, then difficulty is a blessing. And now, when you say Nepal, you have to remember I was in a retreat center for most of the time. So I've never really seen Nepal. I was there for 8 years. And it was only the last 18 months that I moved to Namabuddha, which is our temple. It's in the mountains. You've probably seen it online. It looks really beautiful. It's like in the foothills of all these really high mountains, Everest and all these huge snow mountains, and it's just in the foothills. And it's a little bit more cut off. It looks a bit like Shangri-La, but it's actually a monastery. And I was there to do the web streaming for Trangpa Rinpoche. We did that for 18 months, giving all this transmission. So I was there doing that. And I had a retreat room. And it was kind of, in some ways, it was easier. It was kind of more pleasant because I could just be on myself in my room, do my practice, and then I had a little bit of work to do. And in some ways, then in the retreat, the proper retreat that I spent most of the time, over 6.5 years, then that was really full on. So that was more difficult. But that retreat environment was far more beneficial or productive because I had this kind of one-to-one interaction with my teacher and this kind of intensity of practice and study. So the point I'm trying to make is that difficulty isn't necessarily worse, it's often better. For example, when I was in Nepal, I had a fall and I broke both of my arms. And in general, then we'll think, well, that's terrible, that's really difficult. In fact, my mother had heard about this through one of my friends, and it was a little bit kind of not very good, them kind of telling my mom that I broke both my arms when I hadn't said anything. And of course I didn't say anything. I didn't want her to worry. And it was just my wrists. I just had them pinned up. It's not like I was dead or anything like that. And so anyway, to her, it was like the worst thing in the world. He's in Nepal and he's broken his arms and they probably don't even have hospitals and all that sort of thing. But actually, to me, it was an incredibly positive thing, these sort of challenges. So, and then also we talk about beauty in practice. So this question says, what is most difficult and what most beautiful experiences? Well, in terms of difficulty, then actually my Lama, or my teacher, is an old-fashioned teacher from Eastern Tibet. This is the tradition of like Marpa and Milarepa. And they're really they're really, really kind of, you could say strict in a way, maybe not strict. It's not really about being strict. It's about they really go for it. In general, the Tibetans really go for it. Whenever they do anything, they do it really full on. And that is extremely difficult, right? You know, like I say, we don't even sleep in a bed. You know, I spent 10 years sleeping sitting up. And so that's like difficult. But also that's incredibly beautiful, because practicing with that kind of intensity is what brings results. So actually you need that kind of difficulty. So when I moved from the retreat center to the monastery, then the monastery is more like what you call beautiful, right? The environment was beautiful and it was kind of really chilled, but also progress is less significant because you're not being challenged. But anyway, I'm trying to get to this point about what we call beauty in practice. Now, many people see, let's say if they do Hindu practice, or they do Buddhist practice, meditation, or maybe they do like Sufi dancing, right? There's a lot of kind of spinning and dancing and all this kind of stuff. Or in Osho, they do dancing. And then they want some kind of what they see to be a sublime, kind of beautiful experience with colored lights and that sort of thing. We're really attracted to that. But that's not what we call beautiful in terms of actual meditation. These things are worldly, essentially. For example, feelings of bliss, right? Clarity and non-thought. I mean, these are important. They're experiences of meditation. But as I said before, then what is taught in the Buddha Dharma is that if you cling to these experiences, then it causes you to experience existence. So you know there's the 12 links of interdependence. And so there's this sort of, we've got this sort of craving and clinging and then existence. So if you have this craving and then you cling to that, that's what causes you to be reborn in the mundane world. And it's the same when it comes to these beautiful experiences of bliss and clarity. You know, you could wake up in the morning and your meditation makes you feel very open, and then you look over the valley and everything's kind of really beautiful. But this kind of clinging to that mundane beauty is not a positive thing in terms of the Buddha Dharma. So what many people in the West would consider kind of unpleasant, hard, difficult, you know, would be a negative thing. But to a practitioner who wants to dedicate themselves to the Buddha Dharma, then these things would be like nectar, you know, honey, beauty. And then these experiences of well-being, blissing out, that we see to be kind of beautiful and significant, and most Western practitioners do, they see these experiences of bliss that arise from meditation to be significant and beautiful. Then to a real meditator, then when they have these experiences and they start clinging to them, then the alarm bells are going off. But anyway, I do know what you're talking about. And in terms of what is beautiful, in terms of practice, then the experience of mind is the most beautiful thing. But you have to understand that this isn't dependent upon the appearances. So yes, when meditation is going well, then you have experiences of bliss. But that taking that bliss to be the main thing actually takes you away from your practice. It removes your progress. The essential point of mind is the most beautiful and simple thing that anyone could ever experience. But the problem is we miss it. And why do we miss it? It's because we cling to our habitual notions of what beauty is, peace and tranquility. And I would say, like you say about my experiences in Nepal, that most people, most Westerners, wouldn't want to stay there for a day. Or maybe they'd stay for a day, just have a look, but they'd find it difficult to remain for a week. And that's because it's very challenging. And not only that, like I said, that my teacher is, I don't really want to say wrathful, but he's what it is that he's a bodhisattva. Basically, he's got great compassion, and he knows that the only people who should be in that kind of environment, or the only people who would choose to be in that kind of environment, are those who are really sincerely looking for progress and emancipation. And in order to do that, then you really have to apply yourself. So he's really, 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 really hard on people. and he's famous for it. But it comes from a position of being a bodhisattva. And why do I say that? It's because most teachers, they don't want to challenge you. Because if they tell you off, they say, look, you're falling asleep, you're being lazy, stop that. What did you come here for? You're just wasting your time. You came all the way from America and you're going to sit here and fall asleep? So you'll be telling them off, right? So most Westerners would just be like, oh, this is terrible. You know, this meditation retreat is supposed to be calm and relaxed. So that's the way we see it, right? Beautiful, calm, and relaxed. But where he's coming from is understanding the difficulties of gaining realization and understanding. And everything he teaches is about the mind and about the true, you know, the sort of luminosity, the true light nature of mind. But as I said, most people, you know, you couldn't pay them to be there. It's only really diehards who go there. And in fact, I've been talking to my friend recently about this because he really wants to go. And I can give him a recommendation. If I give him a recommendation, and you can go, you're not allowed to just show up. Somebody has to vouch for you. When I say vouch for you, somebody has to say, well, if things go wrong and this person misbehaves himself, then it's your fault. You have to take responsibility for it. So it's not an easy thing to vouch for somebody to go there. But so basically the whole time, you know, since he said he wants to go, I've just been telling him, well, I'm not sure you want to go. This is going to happen. This is going to happen. He's going to tell you off and you're going to have to do this and that. And but he's still really determined to go. And that's because this friend of mine is somebody who really, really, really wants to learn how to meditate and gain practice. He's really sincere and he's willing to put up with anything for that. So really, when you ask this question, Jay, then it's kind of, you have to turn it on its head. It depends what you mean by beautiful. Like, did you bliss out in your meditation? Yeah, it happens. But I try to avoid that. And in terms of difficulty, then getting up really early in the morning, practicing all day long and studying. And the study is really intense. As I said before, it's 4 or 6 hours a day. But it's the most profound topics, you know. It's so wonderful studying these things. But the problem is we're human, right? So there's only a certain limit to what we can do. And you're pushing yourself continually, year after year, you know, every day, no holidays. That's difficult. But it's beautiful because it brings about results. And so, but in terms of like meditative experiences, then I don't need to worry about these things. Like I said, maybe it's just because I'm arrogant, but through having been in the right kind of environment and having made a connection with an authentic teacher, then I've come to understand what it's all about. And that has been the most beautiful and wonderful thing in my entire life. Because for years, I've been trying to meditate and trying to, you know, increase my practice and come to understand and study, and always been thinking, well, I'm missing something, you know. I'm meditating, but, you know, am I just wasting my time? Just like many of you have said to me, you're feeling at some point that you even want to give up because you've been at it for so long, and it seems like progress is eluding us. And so to be able to actually rely on an authentic teacher, and through that to come to understand what the point is, and when I say what the point, this is what we were talking about earlier in this discussion, is about what is the ultimate meaning, what is the purpose of life, etc. This kind of major paradoxical questions that plague anybody who has a mind that is seeking the truth. And so that is absolutely wonderful. But I have to say, I enjoy meditation. And also what I've experienced is that meditation just gets better and better. And that might sound like I'm bragging. I'm not trying to brag. I just mean once you see, like, it's recognition is what they call it. But it's once you see what it's all about, and then it becomes very kind of pleasurable, really. I mean, that sounds bad. But it's not like mundane pleasure. If someone enjoys Dzogchen practice and they attain some realization, is it necessary for them to practice all the other 6 yogas, for example? Can someone just practice Dzogchen until enlightenment? Okay, so what we have to understand is Mahamudra and Dzogchen, as it is taught in Tibetan Dharma, is the highest level of practice. So we have the Vajrayana practices, right? I've talked about this many times. You know, where you ring bells and bang drums and you have all these complex visualizations. This is called the creation stage practice. There's 2, creation stage and completion stage. And method and wisdom. And this Vajrayana practice is basically method. And this view of Dzogchen or Mahamudra is the view of the Vajrayana. But I'll give you an example to make it easier. So we've got all these complicated practices you do in the Vajrayana. If anybody's done any of this, and you know what I'm talking about. Generally, then we've heard about practices like Chenrezig and Tara and Medicine Buddha. And in that, there's some limited amount of visualization and ringing bells and that sort of stuff. Well, those are associated with a lower form of Tantra. So what we tend to do in retreat situation is we do what's called the Tara Tantra Shastra. Associated with the Tara Tantra, basically. So we do the pujas or the sadhanas that are associated with this highest tantra, highest yoga tantra. So the other ones are called like action tantras, that sort of thing. They're a much lower form of tantra. The ones that you're used to doing, right? Tara and that sort of thing. I'm not saying they're better. It's just the format. And so this kind of Vajrayana practice, this highest yoga practice, is like really, really, really intensely complicated. For example, you have a palace, you visualize a palace, and there's walls surround you as this sort of Buddha or deity in the middle, and there's 5 layers of bricks, and they're all different colors. Right? So you're imagining what the walls are made of, let alone all the ornaments and graveyards and all this kind of stuff. Really, really complicated. And so in the instructions it says visualize this, do that, and then imagine the deity is this. And then there's all the philosophy in there. So it's the 5 Buddha families. What do they represent? What do their consorts represent? The earth element is this one. This, water element is this one. It's really intensely complicated. It says do all your visualization, but if you can rest in the true nature, then do that instead. So this resting in the true nature is the Dzogchen, the Mahamudra, right? So it's what I'm saying is the point of all the practices is to come to this point where you rest in true nature of mind, this luminosity, this clarity, emptiness, whatever you want to call it. Got lots of names. Those names don't help us. But this ultimate object of meditation is our end goal, even when it comes to this Vajrayana practice. And as I said before, then what is taught in the text is the only people who can practice the Vajrayana properly are bodhisattvas on these sort of pure levels, 8, 9, and 10. And so it's like an ordinary being who isn't liberated from samsara can't actually practice the Vajrayana. That's what is taught. So when you say, is it possible just to do Dzogchen? Well, yes, of course, because actually Dzogchen and Mahamudra are synonymous with awakening. The realization of Mahamudra or Dzogchen is the same as the realization of a Buddha. So of course you would rest in that. And then your question is talking about, well, do I need to do the other 6 yogas? We have to understand is the 6 yogas, and in general when we talk about this kind of, this Kriya Tantra, these purification tantras, etc. like that, or as it's taught in the Hindu tradition, the Kundalini, these are there to develop. In general, the way we practice them is we do these to come to realize this eventual view. So if you've already realized it, then you don't need the methods anymore, right? There's method and wisdom. There's loads of methods, absolutely oodles of methods, all kinds of methods. There's methods that involve complex visualizations of deities. There's methods that involve physical yogas, working with the chakras and the channels. There's methods that involve doing, just plain meditation, like in the Zazen or the Zen tradition, where they just sit. Right? There's methods using sexual intercourse. There's methods using alcohol. There's like method. All these methods are only to come to realize wisdom or insight. So once you have insight, then what do you need the method for? It's like you need a boat to cross the ocean, but once you get across the ocean to Plymouth Rock in America, then you can't take the boat with you, right? You've already arrived. And I think the reason why this confusion arises, it's because people don't understand what Dzogchen or Mahamudra is. They think that Dzogchen and Mahamudra are these instructions of rest in the present moment without chasing after the future or recalling the past, etc., 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 or whatever other instruction you've had. That's not Mahamudra. Mahamudra is the natural state of reality as it is, 24/7, unchanging. It doesn't need to be developed or uncovered. And then when you hear that, you think, well, okay, I don't need to do anything. Well, yes, you do. Because basically, we're distracted by all our illusions, our mental fabrications. We spend all of our time with our mental fabrications. And so even though Mahamudra, Dzogchen is just the way things are, we don't see that. We're looking at other things. Like I was saying at the beginning of this conversation, we we see bliss in meditation to be the thing we're after. So we sit there looking at that and ignoring what is called the true nature itself. But it's a complicated topic. I mean, if somebody has realized, as I said, Dzogchen, then basically they're a Buddha. Well, in the meditation they are. As long as they're resting in their meditative object, then they're basically a Buddha. So there's something called equipoise, and there's post-meditative state. And for people who don't have realization, then when they're focused on their object, let's say, when they're resting in recognition, it's a better way to put it, then basically their mind is the mind of a Buddha. But as soon as they're in the post-meditative state, that means when they're not meditating, then they're an ordinary being. And the problem is, if we haven't got kind of stable meditation, or our kleshas are very strong, then we're just completely and continually knocked off of our kind of recognition. We're just being displaced all the time because we've still got all of our kleshas. This is a really important point. Somebody has recognition isn't a Buddha. Somebody who has recognition isn't realized or awakened or enlightened. They've just seen, or they've had a glimpse. They could have just a mere glimpse, or they could have full recognition. But it doesn't mean that they have gone any way to undo their intense negativity. And as sentient beings, then we've accumulated this negativity over countless eons and eons and eons. So it's very thick, right? Now, even if you have recognition, you know what to meditate, exactly what you're talking about, you have no doubt, then you still have this huge lump of very stubborn defilement. And that has to be undone. And so that's why somebody like Milarepa, who has realized, stayed in isolation in harsh conditions for decades and decades meditating, because he still needed to undo these habitual tendencies. And in general, that's the case. If you look at the Zen masters as well, you know, the sort of Bankei, then when he was realized, or he had confirmation of his realization, he returned to his hermitage. And so what is the kind of scriptural backup for that? The proof that this is the position? Well, that's because when you reach the first level bodhisattva, this path of insight, then it's taught that your realization is the same as the realization of a Buddha. So why then is there level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10? And not only that, that this going from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 takes eons. It takes, if you're not an accelerated learner, then it takes a very long time. So there's three types of individuals. There is the kind of one who follows the stages, and that's 99.9% of people. There's somebody who called a kind of advanced learner, but it's not really, the term doesn't mean advanced learner. It means somebody who goes in leaps and bounds. So they can go from level 1 to level 3 and back to 2. They kind of jump around. They're not, they don't progress normally. They might have a bit of insight in this, and then they might fall back to being a totally ordinary being because of the strength of their kleshas, that sort of thing. And then there's instantaneous learners. So like I say, the ones who follow the stages, just like we do in school, grade 1, grade 2, are the majority, vast majority. And there's a few people who can kind of go ahead a grade. And then there's very, very, very few people who are instantaneous learners. For example, Guru Rinpoche, that sort of thing. These really special individuals, right? And so for most of us, then we have to just follow the program. We have no chance. We have no choice but to progress in stages. Can someone just practice Dzogchen until enlightenment? If you're practicing Dzogchen, then basically, as I said, you're realized. In order to practice it, this is what my teacher says. Basically, it's just not only just to practice Dzogchen, but to meditate, then you need to be on the level of insight. This is the way my teacher teaches it. And so what does that mean? Well, everybody who hasn't reached the path of insight isn't really meditating. They're just faking it. Why is that? Because meditation is resting in the view. So it's resting in Dzogchen. But the view is what we call realization. And I have to say that I agree with his position. I mean, of course I agree because he's my teacher. I have to agree in some ways. But also having looked into it, then yes, that makes a lot of sense. So for most people, when they say they're practicing Dzogchen, they're not practicing Dzogchen. They're just kind of faking it, going through the motions. And And same with Mahamudra. And you don't really meet Dzogchen and Mahamudra practitioners. You meet people who are doing the Vajrayana, right? Loads of them. They do Tara Puja. They might have a Yidam deity. There's loads and loads of them, but they're not practicing the Vajrayana. They're just kind of doing the outer aspects of it. And it's the same with Mahamudra and Dzogchen. People go to see teachers and they get these public Mahamudra instructions. Of course, they're not really anything to do with the real kind of mind instructions that you get in a kind of authentic environment. But they're also not mistaken. I mean, Mingyur Rinpoche teaches publicly, right? I mean, Mahamudra is not something you normally teach publicly. But he's not a charlatan. He's very authentic. And there's a reason why he's doing that. And it's similar with Vajrayana. For Easterners, then they engage in these practices to make what's called a Dharma connection. And it's seen to be so important. So they make this connection so that in future lifetimes, they might be born in the presence of an authentic teacher, and then their practice can continue. It can progress. So it's not inauthentic. But there's a difference between this kind of publicly taught Dzogchen, Mahamudra, and what is the real deal, the actual thing. And I know that because I've seen both. I've attended the sort of 6-year program with Taisira Rinpoche, again teaching Mahamudra publicly. And I've also gone through the process as it's kind of normally taught, and that is one-to-one with a teacher in a closed retreat environment. And this is very different. It's a very different process. It has to do with question and answers between a teacher and a student, and the teacher probes the student's kind of experience. And it's not dissimilar to what happens in the Zen tradition. I mean, most people will go to their local Zen center and they'll do Zazen, and they'll feel like they're kind of engaging on this path of realizing the unborn. And this happens a lot in America. I've heard lots of teachers who say they've realized Kensho, etc. But that's very different than what would be done in a real Zen environment, because there, the student and the teacher basically live together. And I'll give you one example of a teaching I heard from a Zen master. And he said that normally they will do this only sitting, right? Shigataza means to just sit. And they don't give you an instruction. You just posture and then just sit. And then you're like, well, what am I supposed to be doing? They don't tell you. What do? They do that like for years. Like, every day, for hours, for years. And then eventually, when the teacher gets some hint that the student is trying to transform, then they might ask them a difficult question or something, or they'll probe them, and they'll guide them in that way. So that's very similar to the traditional way in which the Dzogchen and Mahamudra are taught. And then there's the public teachings. And the public teachings are just kind of a semblance. They're kind of just a tradition, really. And I'm sorry if I sound like I'm insulting anybody or their teachers, but I'm not. They're both valid, but you have to understand that this Dzogchen and Mahamudra is not in any way simple. And, if we had a private conversation, then I could ask you a single question that I think would give you an idea of how difficult it is. We tend to think these things are simple, but when our experience or understanding is probed, and we immediately kind of experience difficulty, because we're not even clear what a thought is, right? We're not clear what mind is, how thoughts arise. And so somebody who has Dzogchen practice has no doubts about these things. It's not that they're repeating something they've heard, but they've experienced the truth of it in their own meditation directly, and they have no doubts. So if you have no doubts, then dedicate yourself to your practice. You don't need to do anything else. You don't need to say mantras. You don't need to ring bells. All that stuff is part of the progressive path. If you actually have valid, authentic Mahamudra or Dzogchen practice, then that's the highest level of practice that there is in any spiritual tradition, as we teach it. Maybe we're just being prejudiced. I see the truth in that from both sides, from the side of the scriptures and from the sides of the realization. I see both of those, the truth of that in both of those ways. But it's for you to decide. It's for you to decide and to find out for yourself. I've lost the questions now. Okay. All right. Let's see what else we have. Hi, I'm from Tampa. I like Florida. Weather's nice. Jacksonville. Oh, okay. Okay. It looks like Mary and Matilda know each other. Have you ever received samaya from more than one lama through your life? Yeah, it's really common, ascension knowledge. It's difficult too. So what you have to understand is that you receive samaya every time you take a Vajrayana empowerment. And my suggestion is that you shouldn't take empowerments lightly. I mean, it's a kind of tradition. We see it as a blessing. And it's not just Westerners, the Tibetans do this as well. If you've got Tibetans who are kind of just villagers and lay people, and then what they tend to do is if they hear there's a big lama in town, then they'll all go rushing there, and they're all elbowing each other out of the way to get to the front of the line, to have water sprinkled on them. And that's what we see an empowerment to do. But an empowerment is a samaya. And what it is it's giving you transmission and permission to engage in these Vajrayana practices. And a Vajrayana practice involves Vajrayana commitment. And some people will say that you don't need to have a commitment to do Vajrayana, but you do. If you're doing it authentically, this is the thing though, we can't do it authentically anyway, so it's just make-believe and pretend. So there's what are called the three vows. Junko Kombo Rinpoche wrote a good text on this. And so there's the Hinayana vows, the Mahayana vows, and the Vajrayana vows, right? And the Hinayana vows are the ones we traditionally see as being, keeping strict discipline, not eating in the afternoon, not having sex, not having alcohol, that sort of stuff. Those are the basic foundational vows of Buddhism. And there's the Mahayana vows. I don't know why I keep saying views. Maybe I'm worried about getting views on YouTube. And then there's Mahayana vows, and the Mahayana vows are basically bodhicitta. So this loving kindness, compassion. And the principle of the Mahayana vows is to never give up on any sentient being. So never to abandon a sentient being. What that means is, it doesn't matter what somebody does to you, however terrible they are, they steal your stuff, or whatever they do to you, that you should never have this thought that even if I get the chance to help you be liberated from samsara, I won't do it. If you've done that, you've lost your bodhicitta. You've lost your bodhisattva vow. But the nice thing about the bodhisattva vow is you can retake it, and you don't need a lama or somebody to retake it. You can just do it with a picture of the Buddha, or imagining the Buddha, or in front of a stupa. And when we say these prayers, Sanjay Cho Dang Soji Cho Nanma Jangcho Bardo Dani Jep Soji, etc., then what we're doing is we're retaking our bodhisattva vow. So it's something we retake every time we do our prayers in the morning, or every time we do our meditation practice. If you say this prayer, that is. So anyway, then there's the Vajrayana vows. And the Vajrayana vow, what's the principle amongst that? Pure vision. If you don't have pure vision, then you've lost your Vajrayana vow. What is pure vision? Utter purity and equanimity. Everything is equal. There is no good and bad. So if you walk down the street and there's a big dog poop on the street and you go, ooh, that's filthy, you've lost your Vajrayana vow. That's it. You've lost it. That easy, right? If you go for breakfast in the morning, you think, oh, my egg's overcooked, I don't like that. You've lost your Vajrayana vow. It doesn't matter what. So there's the famous story of Atisha, Lord Atisha. Lord Atisha was the one who sort of kind of brought the second wave of Buddhism into Tibet, right? He was a traditionalist. He kind of purified Buddhism. And he said, when it comes to the Hinayana vows, so these vows of personal liberation that the Theravada monks take, then I've had no problems. That's all fine. No problems there whatsoever. And there have been a few faults when it comes to the Mahayana vows. So in the Mahayana vows, then if you abandon a being, etc. So I made a few faults, but I always remember to purify them and retake the vow. But when it comes to the Vajrayana, then the faults are like snow in a blizzard. That's the way it's basically, when there's a blizzard, there's just billions and trillions of snowflakes everywhere. So basically every moment he's breaking his Vajrayana vow. So that just shows you how difficult it is. And then this is related to Samaya, because you receive Samaya every time you take a Vajrayana empowerment with, or anybody who teaches a Vajrayana. And so this Samaya is really, really difficult to keep. And not only that, every time you take an empowerment from a different teacher, then you've got Samaya with a different teacher. So it's very common for people to have Samaya with 10, 20 teachers, especially the Chinese. They'll go to every single empowerment they can. Every Lama who comes into town, they'll go get a refuge kind of card from them. They'll take refuge again, and they'll collect all the cards. You get a little card with your name written on it, right? And the Chinese love this sort of thing. It's written in red ink or whatever. It looks all fancy. And they'll have a stack of them this high. But also they'll go to every Vajrayana empowerment. I have no idea what they're doing or what it's about, but they'll go there. And so basically we don't even know we're getting Samaya. But I'd like to think that if you're just doing it as a kind of tradition, it's just like play, like children, they pretend, right? It's play acting. Then maybe you don't have Samaya because you never knew what you were doing in the first place. So maybe it's not so difficult. But my teacher often says that you should be careful. And he won't give empowerments lightly. For example, I did the Lama retreat, so I did the 4-year retreat, and in that you become empowered to give empowerments. This is how you gain the ability to give empowerments, is by doing a Vajrayana retreat, and in that you do drip chins, which are where you do the end of the practice, and then you do self-empowerment part. And so that is what empowers you to do an empowerment. It gives you the right or the credentials to do an empowerment. But I would never give an empowerment. And it's because of this point, because it's something that's really difficult to do purely. If any people ask, and I say, well, you should go to somebody significant, a significant teacher, like the Dalai Lama, the Karmapa, somebody like that, Taisida Rinpoche, don't ask me. And in general, I think that that's a good way to do it. And also, you shouldn't just take empowerments willy-nilly, because every time you do, then you gain Samaya. So yes, it's a very difficult point. And one of the most difficult points in regards to Samaya is that, in general, this is what people think, is that you could get 2 Samaya commitments that are in contradiction to each other. So that could be, for example, one teacher says, you have to do this practice, you have to do it every day. And then another teacher says you have to do a different practice. And the 2, maybe you can't do both because of the time. It'd be too difficult. So this happens a lot. But another way people think is that my teacher told me to do this and my other teacher told me to do this, and they're contradictory. But in terms of actual Samaya, Vajrayana Samaya, there's no possibility for a contradiction, because the Vajrayana Samaya are all the same. What I think people do is they confuse an instruction from their teacher as a Samaya commitment that isn't related to the Vajrayana in some way. For example, your teacher could say, you should go out and steal from that person over there. And they might do that. I mean, Tilopa did that. And then the other teacher says, you should never steal. But it's unlikely for us to get into this kind of an authentic conflict in this way. And like I say, Tilopa had Naropa do all kinds of terrible things that, he would have gotten arrested for. He would have gone straight to jail for doing these sort of things. And they seem to contradict your bodhisattva vow, right? To steal from somebody or, sort of steal somebody's wife. He did all these kind of horrible things. But what you have to understand is that we're not going to be in that kind of relationship. We haven't got the karma to meet a kind of authentic Vajrayana master in that way, like Marpa and Milarepa, right? Marpa got Milarepa to do all kinds of terrible things. He made him build this huge kind of multi-story building single-handed out of stone until his body was completely covered in sores and he was ready to die. He was bleeding. And then Marpa said something like, oh, I don't like that. You have to take it down and put all the stones back where you found them. In fact, one of them is somebody helped him put one stone in, like a cornerstone, in the tower. Some people felt sorry for Milarepa because he was having such a hard time. And so some of the other students of Marpa helped him, and they put one stone in. And then he built this really big building, which nearly killed him, right? And then Marpa said, where'd that stone come from? And then he said, well, they helped me. No, you can't do that. You've got to take it down, pull that stone out and rebuild it, It's like, so basically, we're not going to have that kind of classical kind of reaction with an authentic Vajrayana teacher. We're just going to do kind of public empowerments, and at best, maybe we'll go into a Vajrayana retreat for 4 years and we'll ring bells, but we're not in any danger of doing what Milarepa did or any of these great masters of the past. And it's good, you should know that. You should understand that hey, we're kind of ordinary and we just have to do our best. And if we can be kind and loving to each other and all that sort of thing, and that's good enough for now. And then make an aspiration, do your Tara Puja with a sincere wish that in future lifetimes you will be able to engage in the Vajrayana in an authentic manner. And that's what the lamas and the monks and nuns in the East do. They don't think they're doing it authentically. They don't think, oh, I'm a great Vajrayana practitioner, I'm a Dzogchen master. They don't think that. They think, I'm an ordinary being, but this is such a wonderful practice, and I just have to make this connection. And then in future lives, I can be born in a world where I will meet the Vajrayana. That's the best way for us to think. Consciousness is not the brain. Yeah, it'd be hard to say that consciousness was the brain. But it's worth looking into the position of science in this, because we need to challenge our own beliefs and come to certainty. And for somebody who has really pure blind faith, that will serve them well, as long as it's in an unmistaken object. And this is where Easterners often have an advantage over us. I mean, like people from little villages in the mountains and Himalayas and stuff like that. It's because they naturally have this very strong blind faith. And that really helps, because they accept karma, cause and effect, etc. But there's some limitation in that as well, having only blind faith. Ultimately, you need what is called informed faith. And informed faith arises through your interactions with your teacher and through your studies. Who was your teacher? It's somebody called Khenpo Labu. I mean, they call him Drupan Ken Rinpoche or something like that. But that was a name given to him by Akon Rinpoche. Akon Rinpoche is also one of my main teachers. Akon Rinpoche is an amazing teacher. He's passed away now. But Khenpo Labu teaches in Nepal in the retreat to this day. He's there every day. He occasionally goes to the West or to China for a few days to teach, but he's in the retreat, 330 days a year or something like that, teaching every day for 4 hours or 5 hours every day. And there's other teachers there as well. And he's giving everybody personal tasks to do and challenging them. And he's very challenging. If you go visit there, and I hope you have the good karma one day to be able to do that, people can come temporarily. You have to go minimum 1 week or maximum 1 month as a temporary visitor. But as soon as you arrive, he's going to be checking you out and challenging you and putting you through your, sort of testing you. And he has, he's the most respected meditation instructor, I would say, in Trangu Gompa, and pretty much in the Karma Kagyu. But the thing is that we have this tendency just to see somebody who has a big name as being the best teacher. But when I say the best meditation instructor, I mean he has the most kind of practical, hands-on experience with guiding people to this teachings of the Mahamudra that I know of anyway. But of course there's big names. We think we can just sort of go see the Karmapa for a 5-minute interview and that will be something significant. But really, you need a teacher who you can spend time with. It's not just going to pop in your head just because you've had some water sprinkled on you or something like that, or just because you've been in the presence of the Karmapa. Even Milarepa didn't just get realization. So Marpa was like his teacher of all his lifetimes, right? Significant teacher and Vajrayana master. And it's not like they just met and then suddenly Milarepa became enlightened. He had to go through incredible hardship. And Gampopa as well. Milarepa was Gampopa's main teacher for the Mahamudra, etc. But it wasn't just because of meeting that suddenly Gampopa became enlightened, right? He had to work at it. Okay. It's true we are limited by our bias. Yes, we have to come to recognize what our bias is and accept it. This is where many people go wrong, is that they think they can just hear an idea, a spiritual concept, and adopt that. For example, everything comes from infinity consciousness or something like that. I could say anything, right? Everything is I am, thou art. And we can just adopt that, but it doesn't change our natural bias. It's better for us to recognize what our natural bias is. And our natural bias is very easy to see, right? When you cross the street and you suddenly see a car coming at you, you immediately know that you're very biased towards your own survival and that you don't have the view of no self. So telling myself, as much as I like, there is no self, everything is empty, you know, everything is perfectly pure. That's the view of the Dzogchen. It doesn't help us, right, when it comes to actual danger to our lives or things we don't like. Paul says, I too had an experience when I had a stroke. Oh, which in turn brought me towards a deeper spiritual approach. Yes, this is so true. It happens to so many people. Very, very important. Yeah, I hope your friend is making a good recovery. That's very kind of you, Paul. He's actually experiencing a lot of difficulty. It's very sad. But it's kind of a funny story, actually, because I found this land somewhere I've never been before. I didn't even know existed. And then it's been empty for many years, right? And so I'd said to somebody who I just bumped into locally that this place is empty, and I want to really have somebody in there meditating. But if there's nobody there meditating, then I'd like to kind of offer it to somebody who has local connection or is a local who needs somewhere to live, you know, temporarily. And because of that, then I met this woman, and she's the sister of this guy. So she was visiting from out of town to come help him because he's had a stroke and a seizure and wanted somewhere to stay. So I let her stay there. And so by that, I met this guy by total coincidence, right? And it's kind of a Dharma connection, right? Because I'm trying to use the land locally to be of benefit and stuff like that. And so he, then I heard his story, and he told me about his near-death experience, and it sounded very sad. And so he's been asking me about instructions on the Bardo and advice of Buddhism and meditation to help him with his experience and to understand what happened, his near-death experience. And then, as you know, recently then I've had Samanera, so he's a novice monk, come to stay at the retreat because I'd met him in a monastery somewhere in Vancouver Island, or something called Salt Spring Island. And so he came to stay. And I said, oh, I want you to meet my neighbor, because I thought maybe he would need some help, right? It's good if there's somebody in this cabin that might be able to help him, because he can't see, his eyesight's gone and stuff like that. He's having a hard time. And so I brought Karma Dorji down to see him, and we got out of the car and we're walking up, and he saw him through the window, and he said, I know that guy. And actually they know each other quite well. Like they used to live in Banff, Alberta, and in the same place, and they knew each other. And this is the thing about karma, right? It's really weird, because I have no connection with this place where I've got the retreat. And this guy who had the near-death experience was also only been there for a few years. He only moved there for a few years. In fact, with his wife, who is a Buddhist. And also Karma Dorji is somebody I met by chance. And so, but we can come together and we find out that these two guys actually know each other. And so, he wouldn't even know that he was living there if it wasn't for me being on the property. So it's all very weird. But yes, thank you for your kind wishes. I'll tell him that you're concerned about him. He is finding it very difficult. I mean, recently he's got the flu or something. You know, he sort of can't walk properly. So it means he can't work. That's really difficult. And his eyesight's gone because of the seizure and stuff like that. You can see a little bit, but it's all kind of like unstable. But we hope that things will get better. And at the moment, Karma Dorji is there next door, quite close by. And so he's been helping him, so it's been really useful. He's been really kind. Being hard on students needs a really insightful teacher. Yes, it's not something I would recommend for you to do. And also, there's a lot of trouble that arises from this. But this is the thing about my teacher. It's very clear about what this relationship is. Because nobody would go into a strict long-term retreat unless they were kind of really sincere, right? And he knows that. So if somebody just came in who was just like a day visitor, just coming in to have a look, then he wouldn't give them a hard time. It's only because these people are coming there to really go for it. And he wants them to progress. And because of that, then he challenges them. But it's a very dangerous situation. And the problem is that many Buddhists, they just try to mimic or emulate what the masters of the past did. And so they're horrible to people. And there's no need to be horrible to anyone, you know. You have to have love and compassion and kindness. So time's going on. We're going to have to leave it there. There's a few more comments. But how can we rest in luminosity if that is the nature of mind? Are we resting in mind? Yes, we are resting in mind. Problem is we don't know what mind is. We have no experience in mind. And as I said, the nature of how things are is not the problem. The problem is we've got damn bad habits, and they're really strongly ingrained. We have this like and dislike, and it's happening all the time. And so when we try to rest in meditation, we're continually grasping after things and trying to push other things away. And these, essentially what this is a belief in existence and non-existence. So I said before, the sort of Buddha Dharma is about this middle way that's free of the two extremes of existence and non-existence. And it sounds like a really highfalutin philosophical position, but it's not. It's just the way we relate to every experience that arises. And so this grasping after it and desiring to have is this belief that something has an inherent qualities or existence, and also this wish to destroy or get rid of those things we don't like causes all our problems. And that's how we function basically 24/7, except for slight moments here and there. And even when those moments arise, we don't understand them. We're kind of ignorant as to what's going on. So what we have to do is we've got to sort of find a way to make progress. And initially, what you need is to understand a little bit about what your motivation is. But it's difficult because you can spend all your life just trying to sort of choose a path, right? Well, I did a bit of yoga and I did a bit of this, and you can just waste out your whole life, never really committing yourself. And so what I suggest is that through these kind of conversations, through our discussions, that you can become more clear about what you're after and what you want. And then also get a little bit better educated as to what methods will lead to the result you're looking for, right? And then apply yourself. And there's some things you can do that are infallible. You won't go wrong. For example, if you practice these core beliefs, generosity, love, kindness, and all that sort of thing, you're not going to go wrong. Where you can go wrong is if you start doing things like getting involved in really high spiritual views and strange conduct. That's really risky, especially when you don't really know what you're doing. So start off with these very core principles that are infallible. Almost everybody agrees with. Generosity, kindness, love and compassion, that sort of thing, honesty, all that sort of stuff. Also, if you can, take the 8 precepts on moon days. So that's where overnight, 24 hours, you don't eat in the afternoon, you don't engage in intoxicants or sex, etc. You can look at it on the internet. It's called Nyungne. So it's like this kind of approaching virtue, it's called. Do that occasionally, just so you familiarize yourself with this. It's not like you have to take vows, become a monk. You don't need to do that. But apply yourself to virtue and avoid all negativity, and then engage in some kind of practice that helps you control your mind. And that's where meditation comes in. And the Buddha said that's it. That's the entire path. So you can start there, have a stable practice of that, and then as you become more clear as to what you want to achieve and the ways of doing that, then you can kind of augment your practice. But don't waste your time. Try to apply yourself, and especially don't get sort of just drawn into this kind of neutral karma, just wasting your time. I mean, it's lovely, it's wonderful. We can go for meals. My friend Mac, he likes to have a drink and smoke and stuff like that. Yeah, that's not bad. But try to reduce the amount of time you just waste and increase the amount of time you apply to virtue, and especially avoid negativity, and especially avoid hatred and resentment, right? It doesn't matter how terrible somebody else is. It doesn't help you to become resentful and angry and small-minded. Anyway, I'm just going on and on and on and on and on and on. I'd love to spend more time with you guys, but I've got to go because I've got my parents to look after. And the woman who comes here to help out in the morning on Monday is only here for a little bit, so I better go. So again, always be clear about your motivation. And once you're clear on that, then apply yourself one-pointedly to your goal. And in the end, just give everything away. Any merit, any positivity, whatever there is, just let go. And especially dedicate it to the benefit of those unfortunate people who are racked by the agony of anger, who are afflicted by their negativities and their past karma. For those who can't see a way out of the misery that they experience in the mundane world. So share some of your love. and be a beacon of hope for others. So thank you very much. Love seeing you guys. I really appreciate you taking the time. And generally Monday isn't a good time for anybody, as they say. Rainy days and Mondays. Today's raining and it's Monday, but it's good for me. So until next time, and see you later.